Hi, and welcome back to Manitutor MTG Draft. Today we're discussing Tarkir Dragonstorm. We'll review the archetypes, introduce our concept of base archetypes and clan archetypes, discuss how to navigate three-color drafts, provide our predictions of the format, and lay out color and archetype rankings. Without further ado, let's get into the archetypes.
So we've got some interesting archetypes here in Tarkir Dragonstorm. As you'll notice, they're all kind of oppositional archetypes, right? You don't see the allied color archetypes so much, and you'll note that we've got 2 and 3 color archetypes. So we're going to go over the 2 color archetypes first, and then the 3 color archetypes. And beginning with white black sacrifice, the run through mechanic here is going to be to sacrifice your creatures. You'll get temporary creatures from the mobilize ability that gives you a new creature whenever you attack with a creature that has mobilize on it, and then have the ability to sacrifice those before they disappear at your end step. And then next up, we have the blue-red archetype, which is a 2 spell mechanic. Basically, we've seen this before, where basically every time you cast the second spell on your turn, you get some kind of bonus. The mechanic in this is basically called Flurry. I think in the past it's just said whenever you cast your second spell, but they've given it kind of a code word here. Next up, we have black-green counters. Pretty basic, self-explanatory. But it's important to note in this, it's not just going to be 1+1/+1 counters. There are cards with flying counters, death touch counters, double strike counters. So all of those are going to empower you to do more with your creatures. We've got red-white go wide tokens. This is also a fairly common red-white mechanic that we've seen in a lot of sets. Basically go wide, strike your opponent fast, make it so that you can have blockers on the defensive, but they don't have enough to block your stuff, and then also take some advantage of mobilize and some of the flurry mechanics as well. And then green blue is a mechanic focused around leaving when cards leave your graveyard. So basically, there's a number of cards in this that whenever a card leaves your graveyard, you get some kind of bonus. A lot of times it's draw a card or gain some life, or put counters on something even. Basically, you're going to want to kind of build around that mechanic. So next up, we have the 3 color archetypes, where each one is named after the clan. So we have Abzan Endure. So this, like with green black, it's going to have a lot of +1/+1 counters on your creatures. But then you're also going to have the Endure ability, which lets you either put a counter on something or create a spirit creature token. This is going to kind of combine a couple of those mechanics. You'll also get some of that sacrifice mechanic in there from the white-black as well. Next up, we have the white, red, blue Jeskai Flurry, which again kind of plays off of the 2 spells and the go wide tokens mechanics to cast 2 or more spells, and then also overwhelm your opponent with spells and creatures. Next up, we've got Sultai Renew, which is black, green, and blue. The code word mechanic is on this is use the power of your graveyard to make your creatures stronger. But really what that's saying is it's going to be some of those leaves the graveyard abilities combined with abilities that put +1/+1 counters on your creatures generally. So next up we have Mardu Mobilize, which is red, white, black. This kind of combines both the sacrifice mechanics of white, black and the go wide mechanics of the red white tokens, where you're going to be using mobilize and some of the abilities on the cards to just make your board super wide with tokens and overwhelm your opponent. And last up, we have Timur Harmonize, which is green, blue, red. And the Harmonize ability is an interesting mechanic. It's sort of like Flashback, but it gives you the ability to use the power of some of your creatures to pay for part of the colorless cost of that flashback ability. So if you've got a 5/5, you can use that to pay for up to 5 colorless in the harmonize ability of that spell. So it actually makes it very cheap. A lot of the harmonize abilities are very expensive, but when you use your creatures to pay for them, they become much, much cheaper.
Yeah, and note that it's only one creature you can use. You cannot be adding them
Yes.
up for
Yes.
multiple
One
creatures.
creature. Yeah.
So these archetypes are fairly straightforward. The one that I think is most deceiving might be Leaves the Graveyard for green-blue. There are cards that trigger when something leaves the graveyard, but it's not extremely plentiful. I think the advantage that you get there is more casting something with Harmonize out of your graveyard or Renew out of your graveyard. So it's just card advantage. It's less about leaving the graveyard, even though that's what those mechanics do.
So, along with all of the archetypes, we have the interesting addition of watermarks to a number of cards within the set. These watermarks correspond to each of the 5 clans, and so you have here. Here we have a few examples of them. Interesting to note, these do not just appear on the 3-color clan cards. These appear. Some of these appear on 2-color or even monocolored cards, but it's designed to try and indicate what clan they sort of belong to, and therefore what archetype they might fit best in. So, for example, you've got the Fang Sultai on the lower right or lower left there. You've got Abzan, which is kind of like a scale with a diamond, a dragon scale with a diamond in the middle. You've got Mardu, the wings of the dragon, and then you've got Jeskai, the eye of the dragon, and then you've got last up Temur, the claw of the dragon, and that kind of tells you what archetype they might belong to. Note that that doesn't necessarily mean that's the only archetype it belongs in, and just because Wizard says that's the archetype it belongs in doesn't even necessarily mean it's the best archetype for the card. It's just a little bit of a guide to kind of tell you if you're unsure of a specific card, particularly early in the format. It'll help kind of tell you like maybe what direction you should be thinking of. Let's say you draft a monocolored white card that has the wings on it to begin with. You may, kind of want to move towards the Mardu colors. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the only deck you can build it in, nor does it mean it's even the best deck for it to go in.
So like Matt mentioned, this is a 3-color format, but that doesn't mean that you are drafting the 3 colors equally. Even 3-color formats tend to favor a 2-color base to start with. So I don't mean 2-color and a splash. It can be 2-color and have more than 3 cards of your 3rd color, which is considered usually going into a 3rd color, right? But you shouldn't expect to be able to play that 3rd color early. Roughly the first 3 turns should be playing your base colors. Then past that, you can start getting into your other colors. You want to be able to draft around that notion, and you really want to be responsible with your mana bases. I do think this format will easily support 3, obviously 4 colors, even 5-color decks. Just you have to definitely this will be a good set to go over mana bases again because I think this will be a learning lesson for a lot of people that aren't used to formats that support so many colors like this. So that means starting with the 2-color archetypes and pivoting into the best clan for your seat is probably the right approach to take with this set. So still identifying your seat's 2-color what we call base archetypes, right? Which is the 2-color archetypes, the 5 that we had on the right when we were explaining them. Right. Once you find what's most open to your seat, you then have the flexibility to pivot into the clan archetypes, the 3-color archetypes that are around that 2-color base. And pivoting into that 3rd color might be more based upon what cards you're lucky enough to open or be past, basically the powerful cards, right? The ones that will not last very long in the pack. What you get lucky with might be how you shift into your 3rd color. Whereas your base colors, you really do want to find like what are the open colors to be in. So I think we can go over kind of what this pivoting would look like in a visual. So let's bring up a slide. And the pivoting will look kind of like this, right? We have the 5 2-color archetypes, and then what 3-color archetypes they can all pivot into. So white-black can pivot into white-black with either green or red, right? Those were 2 of the 3-color archetypes supported. Blue-red could pivot into blue-red with either white or green. Black-green can pivot into that with white or blue. Red-white can pivot into that with blue or black. And green-blue can pivot into green-blue with black or red. I do think that this set is somewhat limited in its archetypes in that there's actually 5 core archetypes, which is less than usual 10 or so that we see, right? You don't really want to be in a friendly color pair as
No.
as your base, right? The multicolor the two color multicolor cards are the enemy colors. Like you're going to want to try to be enemy colors and then pivot into a third. That's not to say other friendly color decks I think will be viable, but they aren't what's primarily supported, and it's not what you should be favoring. You should definitely favor finding the open enemy color pair for your seat.
Yeah. And to this end, I think one of the interesting things about this is in almost every set, because there's usually 10 viable base archetypes, right? This has half that. And so, as you just said, so one of the things that I'm thinking about as I start to draft is I'm a lot less scared to pack one, pick one, a multicolored card. Now, does that mean I probably don't necessarily want to pick a three-color multicolor card, a clan-based multicolor card, just in case I don't end up in that clan? But I'm much less scared of picking a two-color, like oppositional pair than I would be in almost any other set that we would play in, right? Because you know you're going to end up in one of those five. Now, granted, you may pick something that's not open to your seat, but that's a risk, when you pack one, pick one, anything, right? You may pick a black card and then get past no black. But, I'm much less afraid of that in this set than I would be in other sets.
Especially since the multicolor cards are quite a bit more powerful in general
Yeah,
than the single color cards. So yes, you have picking a multicolor card more paths to go down in that because the paths are cut in half, right?
right,
And also the multicolor cards are more powerful, so you probably should be sensing and pivoting into your archetype sooner than you otherwise would. And I'd even argue there's actually, in a way, less than these 5 archetypes. And I think we can go into that as well. And the reason I say that there's less than 5 is because white, black, and red, white are kind of the similar archetypes grouped around the mobilized mechanic. I sort of see white is purely aggro in that all the white cards are basically supporting aggro with a few splash defense cards. But I don't think if you are picking white as a primary color, you are going to want to be aggressive. That's
right,
seems to be really how they're pushing this set. Whereas blue, on the other hand, doesn't really have any aggro cards and it's all control cards. And
right,
so the rest of the colors in between can kind of spread that spectrum from the most aggro to the slowest. And so your mobilized aggro is your fastest colors. I think red, white will be a bit faster than white, black by nature, but all that is doing essentially the same thing with a
right.
slight tweak of sacrificing a bit of your go wide with black versus using it and going wider with red. And I think that this is the deck that's most likely to want to be 2 colors. But look, there's a lot of power in the 3 color cards. So I think a lot of the time you will want to expand into the third color to get your power there.
Yeah, and of interesting, I'll note on what you have kind of identified here is the blue red is the slowest control deck. So when you're actually thinking about like how to pivot with that, and I think this remains to be seen. I honestly think Jeskai is going to be one of the weaker color pairings because it's just sort of at odds with what it's trying to do, right? White is an incredibly aggro color in the set, like you said, and blue and red are some of the slowest colors in the set. And so when you're trying to kind of make that work, if as a three color combination, I just think there's going to be a lot of tension there of, okay, well, what are you really trying to do with this deck? Are you trying to be aggro or are you trying to be control? And so not to say that it won't work, I'm sure it will, but just based on kind of this, all the other ones kind of line up, right? If you're playing green, blue, red, you're on the medium, slow to slow side. If you're playing, black, green, blue, you're kind of in that mid range. If you're playing red, white, black, you're the fast deck, right? But like it's interesting that the others don't like they just kind of it's going to I think cause a lot of challenges in deck building to kind of think about what am I trying to do with this deck?
Right. It with white being focused on aggro, blue being focused on control and red split in between to like the fastest and slowest deck, it is a weird archetype. It's the one that I'm also most skeptical of. Now, granted, I think there will be great decks that you can build with red white that happens to splash the blue for a powerful dragon,
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
or even like blue red that splashes some of there are
White for a
few
powerful
defensive
dragon,
white.
right? Like, or
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah.
Or
But I
white
think
has
it,
some removal that tends to be a little more defensive too in a few cards, but yeah.
yeah, and I think that that's the key. That will be some of the better decks that you see in Jeskai. Is it's more of either an aggro white red with a splash of blue here for something, or a very controlling blue red with a splash of white for some of those control like removal spells. Yeah, I think that's going to be where you see those things. But I think that's going to be the hardest deck to build.
Yeah. We haven't talked too much about the mid-range yet, so we'll go into black-green counters next to the mobilize. That would be the deck that's fastest next, and this really does support, it looks like, 2 to 4 colors. You could build a more aggressive version that goes all out on like trample and counters and things like that to try to beat down your opponent. But again, there's a lot of good reasons to go into more colors, and green is pretty good at that. So I think that you could really span the gamut here and what you want black green to do based upon what cards you pick up. So yeah, 2 to 4 colors there. Blue green is interesting. This really looks like a multicolored good stuff, like basically multicolored dragons is what I put here, because it will be good at playing a fairly controlling style and having time to find your fixing, as well as green to accelerate your fixing and even ramp you a bit into the most powerful cards of the set. 4 colors I think will be really what you want to target with that, and maybe even 5 if you get some of the payoffs for that. And then we talked about the control. The interesting, blue has some pretty good card draw spells, so that's what makes me think, well, control, you're going to want to play more colors, like 3 for sure, and maybe even 4. 5
red
can be a little
has
tough, but
yeah. Well, red also has a fair amount of fixing in this set, like
that
more
is
than you would
true.
normally expect. There's the shimmering tiger that like adds Woober,
Yeah,
like when it comes into play, which is just I think going to be a crazy card.
yeah. Iridescent
So
tiger, I think. Yeah,
was it? What was it?
iridescent tiger. Yeah,
Iridescent tiger, not shimmering. Okay, yeah, iridescent tiger. Yeah, it costs 5, but it adds Wooberg when it comes into play.
yeah.
So it's a great way to just be able to play any spell there. Once you play it. So I think there's a number of actually really good fixing in red.
Yeah, maybe the control deck might be a viable 5-color deck as well.
Yeah, well, or at least 4, like you were saying, 3 to
Yeah.
4. But it allows you to kind of play whatever 3 to 4 you want with some of that fixing.
So green, blue, and blue, red also have the advantage on the control side of having card advantage, not just in the cards themselves, but things entering your graveyard to be able to recast, or just even entering milling even to cast them, right? So you also get card advantage effect from those. And green, blue, if you add black, you get a bit more of the renew, and you get a little bit of green, blue, black has like the dragon that makes treasures, right? So I think that might be a little bit more towards the 5-color or advancing colors more. And then green, blue, red has the harmonize, so it might be a little bit more about the rampiness and casting cards of harmonize for your card advantage. I do think your blue red control will be a lot of casting cards to slow down your opponent early, like removal, or even bouncing or tapping down your opponent's creatures early and making up for that with card advantage. So before we go into the color strengths and archetype strength, I want to talk a little bit about the feel of the set, because I do think that in a multicolor set, it becomes even more important than like what grading of the cards, right? Because you have access to more of the cards in any given deck, right? And I will mention the speed of the set seems to be a bit slower. Like Aether Drift, there are not a lot of great 1 and 2 power aggressive creatures. It's not to say aggro decks won't exist. The mobilize mechanic looks pretty strong in my opinion, and it can go wide, but it'll just be a little delayed, I think, compared to aggro decks we've seen in the past. I think the speed will be pretty similar to Aether Drift.
Yeah, I think I think you're probably right. I think there's a possibility for it to be a little bit faster, but only because there's quite a bit of ramp in the set, and I think that that will help play, like particularly in any of the green archetypes, but even things like we just talked about with Iridescent Tiger, right? Like your Iridescent Tiger is ramp. Like once you get to that fifth land and can play it and cast another 5 cost spell, I think that the right decks will be able to capitalize on that and be faster.
Yeah.
But I do think it's not going to be the most aggro set that we've seen. And I think it might play a little faster than Aether Drift because Aether Drift was just so slow. But I think we might be looking at something like a little bit in between, a faster set and a slower set.
Yeah, I especially think the tail end won't be as long as Aether Drift, right? So like the
Right,
whole board stall thing isn't going to happen as
right,
much because there's a bunch of flying creatures. I mean, you still might have a board stall of a bunch of flying creatures
right.
talking
Yeah,
about
you're gonna get flying versus flying board stalls in this, right? Um, but yeah, I agree. I think you're gonna probably see less stalled board states, right? And games literally going to milling out your opponent. But I do think it's the potential still there. But yeah, I think the average turn count of games will go down,
yeah,
which I think was a major turnoff in Aether Drift for a lot of people. So I'm hopeful that we won't run into that again.
agreed. I think green black counters looks pretty interesting. I like how flexible that archetype looks. It looks like it can go fast. It looks like it can go slower. It looks like it has enough fixing to be able to do all the different things in between. So I think that's an archetype that I kind of like when I can notice my opponent's control and go under them, or notice my opponent is aggro and go a bit taller than them, right? That flexibility is interesting to me. And I think I'll be curious to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I'm curious to see it too. I think the success of that archetype is going to revolve a lot on some of those enabling creatures that allow you to move counters. Because I think otherwise you're going to set yourself up for removal, right? You're going to spend a lot of time building up a creature, putting counters on a creature, and your opponent's just going to kill it. And so I think I'm always kind of wary of counter-based decks just because of that,
Hmm.
because it's so easy to wreck your opponent. Having built them up over three or four different casts of things, and then you just spend one removal spell and take care of it all. So that I think is a risk, but I think there's enough support in there that allows you to kind of transfer counters when creatures die, or things like that, or some of the mechanics that allow you to bounce and I think add the counters still to something. So they've addressed some of it, I think, and so I'm interested to see how it plays out.
Yeah, there's a couple things with that too. First of all, that's good advice for viewers to make sure you're not over investing in a given creature,
Right.
right? Spread your counters out. And second of all, there's a decent number of hexproof tricks in the set as
Yeah.
well that can help protect. So you need to keep your mana open to be able to do that. So, it can be a bit tricky, but if you do feel over invested in a given board state on one creature, make sure you leave up the mana and have the protection for it. One thing with blue-red spells that we brought up that it's a deck we're a little bit more skeptical of. It'll be interesting to see how it plays on out. But I will say this card in particular, Bewildering Blizzard, looks pretty powerful to me. Normally, we get a draw 3 cards spell that doesn't add to the board or defend yourself in any particular way. And this one is take the turn off, draw 3 cards, but it protects you while doing it of -3ing all your opponent's creatures. And if they attack into you and you -3 their stuff and kill their creatures, it's sort of a draw 3 cards board wipe. I don't want to go too far with that, but
Right.
I think you can see where I'm going with that. I think this will be pretty powerful in your slower decks. Curious what you think of this, Matt.
I like the card a lot too. I think the problem will be your opponent's going to know it's there,
Yeah.
right? After the first week of the set and people just getting wrecked by it, people are going to see that their opponent has 6 mana open and they're going to know exactly what's going on, that they've got Bewildering Blizzard. And that's going to let you kind of play around it, right? If you've got counters of your own, you can save a counter for it and just wipe it out. If you don't, you can just attack with 1 or 2 creatures. dare your opponent to play it, basically, maybe sacrifice those creatures, but not leave yourself totally vulnerable. There's going to be a lot of ways to play around this card, and it's going to be like upheaval, right? It's like it's coming, right?
Even when you know it's coming, though, there's not much you can do about it. You can counter, yeah, right.
Right.
So that's definitely a thing. But now you're still only talking 2/5 of your decks at most, and a lot of those decks may not even be playing a whole lot of counters. It's really this, I think, the blue-red version that will be playing counter spells, playing a
Right.
lot of like draw go type of thing, right? Playing on your opponent's turn. And so
Right.
that hides it a little bit in that if you're always playing instants on your opponent's turn, they don't know you have this. But even if they know you have this and then they're like, okay, I don't attack you, you just like, great, I just draw 3 cards, like without having to
Well, right, yeah, but
lower my
you yeah,
clock, right?
yeah, yeah, but you can still attack with, like I said, you attack with, like, 1 or 2 creatures to kinda bait it out. There are ways to play around it. Like, I don't mind my opponent paying 6 to draw 3. Like, I don't love it, but, that's still 1 more than that usually costs, so I'm fine with my opponent investing that level of mana and basically wasting a turn into doing it, as long as if I don't attack in with the creatures, right? I'm just gonna be skeptical of attacking in when my opponent has 6, including 2 blue untapped, because I'm just gonna expect this card every time that I do that. So I'm gonna try and, again, try your best. Or like saving removal, so when they -3 your creature, you can kill theirs so that you don't lose the creature that you want to save. I mean, there's a number of ways to kind of play around this. It's a powerful card, though. I like it a lot, but I do think that it's going to be, people will find ways to get around it.
The next thing to say about the set is it is a multicolor set, and so fixing is very prevalent to enable that, right? You have your common lands that gain a life, enter tapped to give 2. You have your evolving wilds. You have your uncommon lands, which I think are particularly strong in that they can cast 3 colors of mana. You have artifacts that come into play, the monuments that fetch you a land as well, which, the monuments I might like less than some of the community. I still think they're powerful. I would rather have lands fixing where I can, but you can't always pick up all the lands. You got to pick up some monuments
And then you have
and
creature fixing,
you have creatures. Yeah.
where you spend 1 colorless and you can add 1 of any of 3 colors. Each of the 5 colors has 1 of these creatures, and you can, use that to help fix your decks as well.
The other thing to mention is that my understanding is the common dual lands will be in 90% of the land slots. They're usually in 50%. While fixing will be prevalent, I mean, you do have to spend picks on them, right? And you will
Right.
want to spend picks on them. So, we mentioned earlier, even starting off in 2 colors early, and then maybe even taking a third color, earlier than you otherwise would, right? Doing that, getting the powerful cards up front, and then quickly pivoting into getting the lands to support them will help leave your draft available to get into your third color, your fourth color, maybe even your fifth color in the right archetype. Continue taking the lands highly. You'll need them to support all your colors. We talked about the power of the multicolor cards, the 2 color, the 3 color. We talked about also how there's only 5 base color archetypes, right?
Yeah.
So unlike what I've been hearing amongst some content creators of stay open in the set, I actually think you might pivot into your archetype sooner because there's less of them and because the particular archetypes are showing the most powerful cards, right? So I think you'll get a signal earlier on. Be on the lookout for the watermarks as well, because that will kind of help indicate what archetypes are available to your seat.
What I think is interesting here, and given it sounds like, based on what you were saying, and I think I read the same thing, that the dual lands will replace 90% of the basic lands in their slots. That's it. That's really notable because that's really getting close to what we had in Pioneer Masters, where we had a guaranteed dual land in a gate in every pack, right? And as we know, that was a 5 color set, right? Like, you playing 5 color gates was the name of the game. Like, it was the best deck, basically, if you could get all the cards for it and support it. And so it became like highly sought after. And I think we might see something similar happen in this set. Now, obviously, you don't have the gates mechanic where you do X depending on how many gates, or gets +1/+1 for every gate you control. Like, we don't have that, but what we will have is the support for those 5 color decks, right? So that you can play 5-color good stuff if you decide to spend maybe your first 4 or 5 or even 6 picks basically picking all of these dual or tri lands, and now you've got a mana base that says I can pick whatever card I want. I can just see what's open here and go for it, right? So I do think there is I think you're right that I think you'll see signals early into what you can go into. But I do think there's potentially a benefit just based on how good we saw, 5-color decks being in Pioneer Masters where it was really supported. If you can pull that off again, you'll just be able to pick whatever you want, particularly in packs 2 and 3. Whatever's there, the best card in the pack every time.
There are certain archetypes that lead more to that, right? And we got to
Yeah,
that in the
right,
color counts per archetype, right? You're not going to necessarily want to do that in Mardu, right? But
right.
in blue green, like I do think that blue green deck will be about expanding into multiple powerful colors and just taking the good stuff, right?
Right. And you're still going to need that green base. You're still going to need that ability to get, the base, run one of every basic land and pull out the ones you need with, a spell that finds basic lands. And there's a bunch of them in this set. So, but so that shouldn't be that hard to get to, right? Even if green is picked over, and I think we're going to talk about the color rankings next, and I don't think that green is going to be particularly picked over, but we've been wrong before, so we'll see. But I do think we're going to get, people will get a lot of value potentially out of those 5-color domain decks.
I will note, I do think that this set cares less about the 5-color theme, and you got to
Right.
that than Pioneer Masters. So I guess I wouldn't go into this expecting 5-color to be the best way to go, right? I see this more as, yes, more of a 3 to 4 color, right? That's the sweet spot. 5 colors is hard to do until you get great payoffs for it, and there are some. They're not quite as prevalent as Pioneer Masters. That's the only point I want to get
Right,
across on
right,
that.
right. Yeah. No, there's no Chromanticore,
Yeah.
right? But there is one that just you outright win the game with the spell. If you, I think I forget what it is. I think you have to control a dragon of every color. I think that's what it was, and if you do, you win the game. So, so lastly today we're going to go over our color and archetype rankings.
But before we go into that, we want to remind you to like and subscribe. Our subscriber count growth has died off a bit. Why? Aether Drift was not anyone's favorite set. So
I'm sure it
we
was
need,
somebody's favorite set.
maybe it was. For the rest of you that are looking forward to a new set other than Aether Drift, we need you to like down below and subscribe. We're still trying for our 1,000 subscriber count. We're 3/4 of the way there and need a little bit of help. So please do that, and back to our content.
We're going to do the base archetypes, not the 3-color archetypes, because those are really hard to kind of come up with numbers for. But kind of as a refresher on our ranking scale, we give everything that is a D plus or above a point score from 1 to 10 based on how we have subjectively rated the cards. We go through, we rated all the commons and uncommons in the set. We assign them that score, where an A plus is 10, a D plus is 1, anything below a D plus is a 0. And then we average the scores between us to come up with the card score and the color score for each color and each archetype. What we came up or what we identified is that based on this, white is the strongest single color with an average score of 3.9, which is bordering really on a C plus in terms of your average card, which is really high. It might be one of the highest
I think
single
so.
color scores we've seen, like as we've rated the cards, and that basically is meaning that white is essentially pushed in a lot of ways, but at the same time, the color score is not going to matter as much because this is a multicolor format. You're not going to be playing single color decks. You're going to be playing decks in aggregate with other colors. So to that end, the scores of the other ones, red, blue, and black, are all kind of in the middle there with like a 3.4 to 3.5 average rating. Red's obviously a little bit higher there, but again, the difference is fairly marginal. Notably, Green is at the bottom of the list with just a 3.34, so that's averaging about, really, if you round down to a C. So that doesn't mean that green is going to be bad, right? As we've been saying, green has fixing. Green is going to get you into more colors, but it just means as it's on its own, green had the weakest cards that were green, right? More interesting are kind of the archetype strengths, because as you can see, it doesn't necessarily line up with the individual color rankings. You know, the strongest archetype, when you consider the strength of both the individual colors combined in it and the multicolor cards that go into that archetype, is actually white black. As far as the base archetypes, remember, we can't really rate the 3-color archetypes. Followed by white red with 3.58, black green with 3.32, blue red with 3.31, and blue green down at about 3.2526, in that range. But again, that's also deceptive, right? Because as we talked about before, blue green is the option that's going to make you most viable into, 4 or even 5 colors. So depending on what you can get to support it, depending on whether you drift towards that blue green red or that blue green black archetype, is going to determine kind of like the overall feel of your deck and the strength of your deck. I think that these rankings are going to matter a lot less. That said, I'm probably not going to be as up on green to start with. It doesn't mean I'm not going to avoid it in any way, like, whatsoever. If I see good green cards, I will probably go into green. But I'm probably looking for like the white black, the white red, or the Mardu, archetypes, early on, just because the raw strength of those cards seems to be better. But what do you think, Jeremy?
Yeah, I agree with that. I do think that the reason that white, red, and black look the strongest here is they had to push it in order to make aggro viable, and that the slower decks that have access to more colors are going to be quite powerful in and of themselves because they can do that, right? And so, like you said, the stats don't matter as much. So this round, instead of putting the stats as how we felt on rankings, we eliminated that and went to feel by ranks here in colors. So still have white does look very pushed, right?
Right.
Probably has to be. Don't quite know if aggro will take on over or whatever. I don't think it'll dominate the. There will be a lot of ways to go controlling in this set, but white does look pushed. We have to acknowledge that. Um, I did put green next in feel because I like how it can splash for any other colors, right? So
Yeah.
it leaves you open. It can do a lot of things. It can pair with black to go relatively aggressive too, right? The flexibility made me say that's equal to white. I do think those two colors are probably better than black. Blue is probably on par with black. And I do think red looks the weakest overall. That's partly to the comment we had earlier that red is split to be like aggro with white or controlling with blue. And so you'll just want to be on the lookout of what types of red cards you're getting if you
Right.
go into red. It's more of a
Yeah.
support color.
Yeah, it's definitely a support color, and I think you want to, because a red base deck is going to struggle because you're going to be constantly trying to find the cards that fit in the faster version of the deck and the cards that fit in the slower version of the deck, and building a red base deck, that has, like, say, a white and blue splash, is going to be really hard because you're constantly torn between the aggro version and the control version. And if somebody else is taking all of the control cards, you're not going to have access to the red control cards. So you're going to have to basically go into that aggro. And so you should just do that. So I think that's the challenge that players are going to have to figure out is, using red in the way that it's best going to support what you're trying to do with your deck, instead of taking red, and just trying to, then figure out what you're going to do with it.
Matt, I think you're going to like this set a lot. I'm looking forward to the set. And the reason I specifically say that I think you'll like it a lot is you have really progressed over the last several sets in deck building. So you've been a good player for a long time, but like your deck building skills in particular, I've been impressed with. Like we swap decks and stuff, or deck lists and get advice from each other. And you've really been exploring the creative splash route in the last several sets. And probably Pioneer
It doesn't
Masters
always
might have
pay
been.
off. It doesn't pay off a
Yeah,
lot of the time, but
but like
my win rate doesn't reflect that. But sure,
at the same time, you can tell the creativity, the
right,
the feel that you have for your deck building, and your mana bases have been good behind it. And so this will offer a lot of that potential. Like we are both natively more aggro players, so I think we're going to
right,
enjoy. Like I'm definitely going to want to get into the mobilize. Like I'm excited to do that,
yeah,
and I think you'll like that. And this is giving me a little bit of the Wilds of Eldraine vibes, where I would just draft the most powerful adventure cards of any color and
right,
be able to play the the other side of the adventure card, right? Like with
right.
spare.
And that gets to a mechanic that we haven't even talked about, Omen, right? We haven't even talked about the Omen mechanic, which is basically uh, similar to Adventure in some ways, in that it gives you a second play of the card, but then it shuffles the card into your deck.
Yeah,
So I'm going to be interested because it's going to be basically impossible to mill people out in
yeah.
this, because if you have a dragon that has an Omen ability, you can just play it consistently and shuffle it back into your deck and draw it next turn.
This isn't a set for
So
milling. There's not like don't try to go into the set with milling. I don't.
right, right,
I didn't
right.
see anything really supporting it.
It was very big in Aether Drift. There were definitely a number of cards that you could use to mill out your opponent in Aether Drift. So I'm glad that we're going to basically have a mill proof set. I don't want to lose a game to milling ever again. So
Matt, will you be more open to milling yourself in this set, though? Are you still against
if
that?
if I have dragons that I can just constantly play the Omen and never run out of cards, yeah, sure.
Okay. I want to see you play Blue Green Leaves Graveyard, and I want to see some of those mill yourself cards in there to help you get card
Yeah,
advantage or fixing or whatever with
yeah,
it.
yeah. So that was our first look at Tarkir Dragonstorm. And we'll be back, next week when the set releases with some of our initial impressions. And if you like this, please don't forget to like and subscribe down below. And let us know what you think of the set. Let us know what you are looking most forward to, what you don't want to see. And we will see you guys in the next one.
See you in the next one.
Moneymaker. I mean, people
Yeah.
love Command. I love Command. I play Commander, like, with friends in DC all the time. So, um,
I'm too much as a strategy guy that like I mean there is what CEDH or whatever like competitive one, but I don't know
yeah.
how much I believe that it's actually competitive. I don't know.
Well, I mean,
Maybe it
yeah,
is.
yeah. I mean, it's yeah. You're not going to see like Commander tournaments, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Well,
that's the thing.
there are technically,
There
but
are
like I
there
don't
are
know.
yeah, but they're not. It's not big. Like, there's no
Yeah.
Commander World Tour, right?
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't happen. There should be, in my mind, because like Commander decks are actually like the most strategic you can get in Magic. You have to
I
build 100 card deck,
yeah,
and
I like the singleton. You can't.
right,
It's
yeah,
so random. You can't like you won't have the same gameplay over and over. Like, and there's
right.
a lot of skill involved in all the variants of that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, like, they're really hard to build. That's honestly, that has been what improved my deck building skills,
Yeah.
right? Like, sitting down and trying to build a commander deck, because while you get access to like you have access to tens of thousands of cards that are legal in commander. So you kind of have to really think through, I got to put together a deck of 100 cards in this, and it's got to work around a theme and a strategy that is hopefully aligned with my commander, right? Because that's the whole point. That's the only card you're guaranteed to have access to.
Yeah.
Um, so it's actually really really interesting and really difficult. I mean, there's obviously like there are plenty of good commander decks out there, and you can just like pick an off the shelf commander deck if you want to that someone's already built. But I think it's more fun to find new and interesting strategies with them, because there's so many strategies out there that people probably haven't even found yet and won't find for years,
Yeah.
because there's so many magic cards out there. There's so many legendary creatures out there, and every day somebody's going to find a new, like, really really powerful commander strategy. That's what I find interesting about it, because it's
Yeah.
like, you know standard, there's like a dozen viable decks, right, and some variations on them at
Yeah.
any given time, and that's it.
Yeah.
And, you know,
And
like
of that, 3 of them are actually competitive. Yeah.
right, right. Yeah. And, you know, like every so often somebody will invent or come up with a new idea that just kind of plays against those three most common and do well. And then somebody will find something that beats that deck. And, you know, but Commander's much more interesting because you never know what you're gonna face. Like you know, until your opponent shows their commander at the beginning of the game, it's like, okay, this could be anything. This isn't gonna be one of 12 decks though.
Yeah.
So, anyways, yeah.
Yep.
My rant on Commander.
Future considerations for growing the
Yeah.
channel.